Thank you so much for coming back and joining us here in the theatre. I'd like to just again thank and acknowledge Penny and Rhoda for their previous session. What an amazing session that was. And even with feedback that we're getting, we've got a live hub happening up in Cairns at the moment, and we've got someone up there who actually travelled for like an hour and a half and actually has gotten so much out of that one session already, so quite incredible. So it's a pleasure to welcome you back to our third session of our first day here in the theatre. It's time to change your room in Slido, please. So you should be able to change that over to 1.2 it must be now. Seems like a long way to go yet. But this session has been titled The Regional Renaissance, Going Global and Staying Local. And I think there's certainly a lot to talk about. In the lead up to this event, I had phone calls with each of our speakers here today. And I think hoping that an hour and a half was going to be long enough, because I think collectively we actually spoke about 3 hours in total on topics, and but there was so much in there, and I'm just going to try and distill the conversation down. But who better to discuss this than our lineup here today? So let me introduce you to each person. I'll start with the person on my left here is Kate Marks, who's the CEO of Ausfilm. So Kate joined Ausfilm in 2014 as its Executive Vice President in International Production and was based in LA before being appointed as the CEO in October 2019, just before COVID. What a great time to join as CEO. And during her time at Ausfilm, Kate was also the President of Australians in Film for almost 4 years. Prior to Ausfilm, Kate also worked at Film Victoria as General Manager, Incentives and Location and Production Services for around about 10 years or so. Yeah. Next to Kate is Grainne Brunston, who's the head of Screen New South Wales. You heard from her earlier, but Grainne's got more than 20 years' experience working in the creative industries. In addition to her previous roles at Screen New South Wales and Arts New South Wales, Grainne's worked in leadership positions in international cultural relations with the British Councils and also with arts organisations in Sydney and in teaching design studies at tertiary level. Alongside Grainne is Jo Dillon, who's the Chief Creative Officer of Screen Queensland. Jo's worked at Screen Queensland since 2014, predominantly as the Executive Vice President for Content, but she was recently appointed as the Chief Creative Officer in July of last year. Awesome title. Jo also sits on a number of boards and advisory boards with a particular focus on champion diversity and inclusion in the screen industry. Prior to Screen Queensland, Jo worked at Screen Australia and also in the UK for Emmy-winning production company Yip Films. And finally, but not least, of course, is Jennie Hughes, who's the Director of Screen Territory, who's come all the way down from Darwin. Jennie's worked at Screen Territory as its director since August 2018, and prior to that time, Jennie's held positions as the CEO of the New York Film Academy Australia. She was the Chief Operating Officer of Screen Queensland for a time, Festival Director of Brisbane International Film Festival, amongst many other roles as well. So please join me in welcoming all of our guest speakers for this session today. Okay, let's get on to the topic. We're all very aware that there has been a significant increase in production in Australia over the past 12 months after nearly the entire industry was shut down because of COVID pandemic last year. This week I was reading in an article about how Australia is entering a golden age of film and television. I'm sure you were in that article, Kate. And whilst that statement was probably associated with the international actors heading to Australia, it did acknowledge the international networks and studios were capitalising on our homegrown talent and also our inbuilt versatility. But the question of this topic session is really, but where does regional Australia sit in all of this? And what is each of our funding bodies and organisations doing to respond, to support and to respond, and what else is happening? So during this session, I'd like to, I suppose, cover off three key areas. The first one being what's been happening over 12 months, both in terms of global regionality, so looking at Australia as a region within the globe, and also what's happening regionally in each of the states represented on the panel here today. The second thing I want to talk about is what the support and the funding that's available for each of the states for regional stories and regional people to connect to global audiences, and what are the results that we're seeing. And finally, the impact and the opportunities for regional Australia that's being created from the international productions that are being attracted here, and how are each of the agencies and organisations responding to those opportunities for the crew and also the demand for infrastructure. So let's start big. Let's look at Australia in terms of being a region of the globe, and we'll start to work down from that. So, Kate, the primary purpose of Ausfilm, if people don't know, is to connect international film community to Australia, its incentives, its facilities, its talent. So can you please take us through what's been happening lately and where Australia sits within that global screen industry and how Australia's been responding to that?
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Lovely to be here. So as Ken says, Ausfilm is responsible for promoting Australia globally to, to bring these international productions down here. And as we know, as Penny and Rhoda mentioned before, and as has been in the paper, it really is a bit of a boom in activity at the moment. And that is, I guess, heightened in the last 8 to 12 months for a number of reasons. But I think it's important to look beyond that as well and go, this has been coming for some time. So I think there's been huge interest from our international partners for many, many years in coming back to Australia. And based on a number of reasons, which I'll talk through in a minute, we're really capitalising on that and getting a lot of productions down. So since, I'll just throw out some stats because they're always at the top of my head, since 2018, which is when the federal government introduced the location incentive program, which was to boost the existing location offset to make us financially competitive, Australia's attracted 22 productions. 12 of those have been in the last 8 months alone, so since July last year when they added further funding to that. So that is, an incredible amount of production. That's more production than any of us have seen in many, many years. And what that's really done and why that's happened, it's a mixture. It's because I really think what's driving a lot of this is Australia's expertise as an industry. The world wouldn't be looking at us if we didn't have such incredible talent, both below the line in the crews that we have and, of course, our above-the-line talent, our infrastructure, our post-production, our visual effects facilities. So the industry that we have is so well-regarded and so well-known that these partners have been looking to work with us for a long time, but we needed to be financially competitive to make that work. So in the past couple of years, that's really happened in terms of the location incentive. And that's what's driving a lot of this work. And then in the last 8 months, of course, COVID and how we are deemed a safe place to work is what's, I guess, driving the intensity of the amount of production. I would say we're really certain that a pipeline of work will continue beyond COVID. So even when the rest of the world opens up and becomes more safe to work as well, it'll become more competitive and productions will start going back to other territories. But I'm very sure that the partners that we're working with will continue to come here and work with Australia.
Yeah. And how many of those productions do you know of, you may not know of, in regional Australia at the moment, I suppose, in terms of...
There's a lot of them.
There's certainly some in this region. The States would probably
be able to talk. I mean, this region, excuse me, has obviously been very busy with both domestic productions and international. And then there's productions up in far north Queensland, in the far west Queensland, and moving around the regions.
Let's head that way. Let's head on to New South Wales next, Grainne. What's been happening in New South Wales and regionally, and in particular? Obviously, we've seen a lot in this region here in the Northern Rivers, but we're not the only region who's kind of benefiting from the increase in production, and it's not only international production, is it?
No, it is also, as Kate said, it's local as well. I mean, I guess a couple of things. One of the reasons that internationals have been attracted here is our ability to really bounce back in terms of this industry very quickly after COVID. In fact, we had productions that shot all the way through COVID because we had COVID guidelines, we had public health orders that supported, and certainly in New South Wales, the government view was all work is safe and all work is essential unless it's categorised as dangerous, which in the beginning was, gyms, restaurants, bars, all the kind of hospitality and that kind of thing. So there was certainly a support for people to carry on working in the same way that the construction industry did. So there was a lot of kind of support to make that happen. That was then, we were very lucky that we didn't have a kind of a spike. We're obviously a very compliant nation with the health orders, and we kind of kept things under control, and that was all managed quite well, and that's been very visible globally in terms of, we've been much luckier than other parts of the world. I think, as Kate said, the reputation of crews, the facilities that we have, everything from, pre-visualization that might be in VR that's being done, for big international pictures, right through to post-production and VFX at every step along the way. We've got globally competitive crews and globally recognised crews, so that's also good. We wouldn't get international pictures without a strong local industry. We don't have a strong local industry without also having the internationals coming in as well. So it is a bit of a self-reflexive kind of ecosystem, if you like. In terms of what's been shooting here, so it started off in terms of the international stuff, really with 9 Perfect Strangers that came up to this region. It had been about to shoot in LA, couldn't, because that was all closed down because of the unions in the film industry there and the actors union, and so that relocated here. Since then, we've also got God's Favourite Idiot, which has just started production again in this region. But we've also had a number of other things that have come right across the country, and Joe will be able to talk about some of the Queensland productions as well. This area, I guess, it's also got a couple of things. It's got some very high-profile, very public residents who are great PR. And so I was talking to there's a federal team that the Prime Minister has set up about global talent attraction and getting businesses and international people here to come and work in Australia. The Chris Hemsworth factor can't be undenied, and he's certainly been a kind of really great ambassador for this region in particular, which I think has also been a draw card for some of those high-profile people. Quite often it can be hard to get A-list cast to want to come to Australia because it is the other side of the world for many of them. They've got kids and lives and all the rest of it. COVID was a perfect time. We were a very safe environment for them to relocate their lives. Now they're here, they've kind of seen that it works for them personally, it works professionally. So like Kate said, I think we will continue to see those big productions come here after COVID is gone. There are also productions that are now following casts. So Melissa McCarthy was in 9 Perfect Strangers. Her next project has followed her here. Again, that was supposed to shoot in LA. Also in New South Wales, we've got Pieces of Her, which is a Netflix show. Was supposed to shoot in Vancouver. Vancouver was closed. When it opened, it was the wrong kind of weather for that kind of a show. So it's now in Sydney and regional areas, kind of Blue Mountains, Western Sydney, Central Coast, Newcastle, that kind of area. There have then been, other shows that are looking out west, way out west, and down south as well. So there's a good spread. It's not just the internationals, though. There's been a boom, really, in terms of local production. I think we thought at Screen New South Wales that we would have fewer applications for production funding, given the quotas and the relaxation of the quotas for free-to-air broadcasters, and also just given anxiety around starting productions up and that kind of thing. But that's not our experience at all. We've been inundated, not just in development, which has just gone gangbusters, but also in production. People are getting things up. People are getting shows away to streamers, but also to free-to-air broadcasters as well, and ABC and SBS. So it is incredibly busy. And as Rhoda and Penny said this morning, getting a crew is really tricky. What are we doing about all of that? Well, we're making sure that all of those international shows have got trainees, have got attachments, so that we're trying to kind of make sure that people are getting credits on these Netflix shows, these big feature films, so that they are then ready to move into the next stage of their career, whether that's on local production or international.
Great, thank you. Do you have any statistics about what's
been local? I did take my notes.
But any statistics for the last 12 months or so?
So for the last 12 months, things that have shot locally, we've got 9 Perfect Strangers, Pieces of Her, God's Favourite Idiot, which are the big ones. Then locally, we've had Wakefield, which is about to come onto ABC, Royal Flying Doctors Service, which is shot out in Broken Hill, Carmen, which is a new feature film from Gold Coast, which is shot out in the far west of New South Wales, Drover's Wife, The Legend of Molly Johnson, which shot in the Monaro region, which is Leah Purcell's directorial debut feature, and which is actually screening this week at South by Southwest, which is fantastic. TV series Eden, which is a local production to this region and shot up here. There was also Barraville Murders in terms of factual Australian country music. Little J and Big Cuz did some revoicing in language, and they were down in Wagga. There's also a lot of reality and game shows that have come here, both big US shows that have relocated just to shoot here. I was talking to one production company that did 7 shows last year. They're doing 15 this year because there's a lot of US content that can't film in the US, so it's relocated here, and it works well here. I think anybody who's American in Sydney has had a job as a contestant so far. So there's things like, I'm a Celebrity, the Australian version located up here rather than going to South Africa, but the UK version and the German version are looking to come back this year. SAS Australia was in the Snowy Mountains, and it will be back again this year. It's supposed to shoot in New Zealand, but they did it here and it worked. Doctor, Frayed Series 2, and Total Control Series 2 as well.
There you go. What a list. It's quite impressive.
It's just the last 12 months.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite incredible how much production. And a lot of those are actually domestic productions and not just the international there, which is
mostly domestic. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, what about Queensland? Obviously, it's pretty busy up on the other side of the border from here as well, isn't it?
It is. I think we've all had pretty much the same experience, actually. It's been a bumper year in lots of different ways. And for us, actually, interestingly, regional production was really the first cab off the rank when we came back to production after that COVID hiatus. I think we've been so lucky that that gap in our ability to be in production and to be working was so short in this country. And as both Kate and Grainne have said, such a lot of work has been done by governments all around the country to keep everybody safe and to actually put that emphasis on our ability to work and keep working. And that's really not only enabled our own productions, our domestic productions to go ahead, but also for us to be seen as this safe haven, or as we like to say in Queensland, production paradise.
Ooh, I like it.
For international production, and it really has been a boom year. But it was in Cairns actually that production came back in Queensland with a couple of locally made and local IP productions, This Little Love of Mine and Dive Club, and they were able to use a disused holiday resort up there to keep all of their crew together and to keep everybody, I suppose, ring-fenced and quarantined. And they came back very, very quickly and were able to work within what were then fairly, they weren't particularly stringent restrictions, but there were still restrictions on what you could do. And so they were able to put some money into the economy in far north Queensland, who were really struggling with the loss of tourism, but also to safely produce. So regional Queensland actually has played a big part in the rebirth of the industry. And I've got a little list too, because it's like having many children and not wanting to leave one out. But since those 2 shows came up, we've had quite a few factual programs that, again, local factual, which have been made regionally. Boy from the Bush, which is the Lee Kernaghan story, is currently shooting. Flyways, which is a beautiful documentary about the migration of birds, is shooting. And Reef Live came up to Cairns for the ABC. Coming up, we've got Taylor's Island, which is a show which Fremantle Media are making in that kids' tween space. We have Irreverent, which is a show that Matchbox are coming up to make. And Australian Survivor is going to be shot in Cloncurry, so in outback Queensland, which will be, I think, a really interesting look and feel for that show. Very sort of distinct departure from Fiji, which is where they filmed previously.
Very different.
And, of course, drum roll, George and Julia. And Ticket to Paradise, which is filming in regional Queensland in the Whitsundays. So there's been a real sort of, I suppose, regional rebirth as a result of COVID, as well as there being a general boom in production as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really evident with a lot of the articles that we're seeing and a lot of the information that we're seeing coming out is the importance of the regional sector. And it's actually for crew and for people in those who live in those areas, a lot of the time that means that they can actually stay at home and with their families and with their friends and, don't have to leave because it's always been a project-based kind of industry. And I think that's such an important thing, and it's such an important thing of this session, of that going globally but staying locally as well.
That's right. And I think when you have such beautiful locations which portray really kind of desirable lifestyles or really intriguing landscapes, they're great places to film and they're great places to tell stories. And so I can see the attraction very much of Australia and regional Australia to international filmmakers, international production companies and studios. But you're right, absolutely, for those people whose lives are in regional Australia, it's fantastic to be able to stay at home. We all know that crews will go where the work is, but it's been brilliant to be able to bring the work to where they are.
Yeah. And talking of beautiful and intriguing landscapes up in Northern Territory, wow, there's some beautiful things that have been filmed up there, and there's been some really exciting announcements lately as well for the Territory. Jennie, do you want to talk us through some of those?
Well, it's kind of interesting in the Territory. I've only been up there for about 2.5 or almost 3 years now, which is amazing how it's gone so quick. But when I came up there, I think we had a fairly modest amount of money, and that's really where it stems from, because really the agencies need to have a certain amount of funding that you can put into shows to really support your sector. And the government did give us a bit of money, and over the last couple of years, in particular, we were able to kind of fast track and really sort of fast track production. It's kind of interesting. For a population, I guess, of 250,000, that's it for the Territory. Massive space, but not a huge population. But we do have 30% of that population is Indigenous. So most of our stories, really, if I was to kind of really have a look at a real point of difference for the Territory, I'd say there'd rarely be a project that comes across our desk that doesn't have either an Indigenous creative, Indigenous producer or director. So it kind of permeates through everything that we do up there, the culture. But over the last couple of years, it's been fantastic. We've had Robbie Hood, of course. We've just had High Ground come out. I'd say we don't have perhaps the depth of production that the other states have, but we have really good quality. We have great writers up there, which is just fantastic. People like Daniel McLean, Stephen McGregor, who wrote Sweet Country. And we've now got Mavericks now just about ready to shoot. I was actually coming here today and just was listening to a read-through of all the cast, which is so exciting. It's you work on these things, and as my colleagues know, you work on these projects for so long. I mean, it's been years in the making by the time you go through development. And I suppose Mavericks, which is a 10 by half-hour children's series set around a motocross in the middle of Australia, right in Alice Springs, started about 3 years ago. And it's taken that long to come to the screen. But the attraction of, I think, regional is really amazing and shouldn't be underestimated, because you look at something like a Netflix came on board and pre-bought that right from, I think, first script, which is incredible. So, and the ABC's been with us for quite some time, and of course the fabulous Australian Children's Television Foundation, who are just fantastic with kids. So we've really got like over the last couple of years in particular, because we have had that extra funding, we've been able to put more money into development and really support our stories, our regional stories. And I think in the Northern Territory, because we don't really do the big inbounds, we do tell those regional stories by nature of our place. For example, even with Mavericks, the attraction with Netflix was the fact that Alice Springs was a character in that film, in that series rather. So, I think it's really great when you kind of get that interest in regional. And I think the biggest challenge for us is we want to keep our crew there, and rather than going down south to work on all of the productions that are down here. So we struggle as well. And I think what we're going to be doing for the next 12 months in particular is really have a look at upskilling and really kind of putting some really good training programs in place, putting people attached onto Mavericks, for example. We've got another series coming through. It's going to be shooting in Beswick, which everything's a long way away, actually, Ken. It's, Beswick's like literally 3 hours from Darwin. It amazes me when you do meetings in the Territory, because I'll go out to Alice Springs, which is 2 hours flight from Darwin. I thought it was just down the road when I went there. But I've got filmmakers who travel in from Yuendamu, which is a 3 hours drive. So it sort of puts it in perspective, I think. But it's really exciting. It's an exciting time for the Territory. I'm really thrilled with I think the filmmakers that we've got there and the depth of talent.
Yeah. And I think something that we're hearing a bit already, and we're only really early into the session, is about the crew. And obviously that we need to be looking at making the most of these opportunities and skilling up crew, especially in regional areas, but also about the development side of it. I think nearly each of you actually just mentioned about the development that's actually really gone off through that COVID period. Do you want to talk about some of the support or the programs that each of your states are actually providing to not only develop stories to go from regional Australia to the globe, but also responding to those crew skill gaps and everything else as well? Does anyone want to jump in there on the first one?
I'm happy to jump in.
Excellent. Thanks, Jo.
I think in March 2020, I think many of us thought that development might be all we were going to be able to do. And I know that at Screen Queensland we diverted a significant amount of money into developing projects and also into initiatives that were really based around the idea of giving people chances to develop their skills or to learn new skills. And so we did put a significant emphasis on that side of things in March of 2020. And then we found in sort of July of 2020 that we were also in production and that we were faced with the brilliant problem to have of this great interest in people coming to Australia and to Queensland to shoot. So in a way, we've had an embarrassment of riches, but I don't regret in any ways the time and money and emphasis that was put on developing talent, developing projects. And in a funny sort of way, and I sort of reflect on this a little, I think the interest that international companies have in Australia and in the Australian regions says to me there's something interesting about the Australian regions. And so why wouldn't we as filmmakers, as writers, as directors want to capitalise on the interest that's there and tell our stories for the world? Because we've already demonstrated that the world is interested in looking at Queensland, in looking at regional New South Wales, in looking at the Northern Territory, in looking at regional Victoria. So why on earth would we not then kind of extrapolate from that, well, there's an opportunity here for us to actually invest in our own local talent, and there is such a wealth of local talent. I certainly know that in Queensland there is incredible talent all across the state, but especially in the regions where there is a very, very distinct perspective and a really particular point of view that we don't always see on screens. And I think it's fantastic to consider what this interest in the regions can do for our own interest in the regions driven by local talent.
Yeah, and probably a good time to do a shout out to our live hub in Cairns.
Oh, we should.
And also,
Hello,
acknowledge what we're doing up in far north Queensland with Screen Queensland as well, and actually rolling out programs up there over 3 years to really address the skills gaps and develop the industry up in that part of the world as well.
Yeah, that's right. And there's been a very concerted and clear effort being put into making sure that the growth of the screen industry in Queensland isn't isolated to southeast Queensland, and there's been a real focus on far north Queensland, and we're already seeing the fruits of that. There's some really fantastic work coming out of there, and the programs that Screen Queensland is running in partnership with Screenworks. We're really starting to see the fruits of that, and really starting to see some fantastic work coming out of there, and some new talent that we hadn't previously heard from, and really interesting voices, really interesting storytellers, with fascinating projects that I don't think that we would have stumbled across any other way. So I think it's always worth those investments in places that are, I think, genuinely underrepresented on our screens.
Yeah. And Grainne, obviously Screenworks and Screen New South Wales do a lot together as well, and there's other programs that you've also been running at Screen New South Wales, obviously with not just development, but also supporting skills development and industry development. Do you want to talk about some of those kind of big ticket items as well?
I guess like Queensland, we also kind of diverted a lot of money into development and slate development as well. So production companies that had 3 or more kind of projects that were ready to go. And we doubled our development budget last year over, I guess, 1920, 2021. But again, like Queensland, we were kind of then inundated with also production applications as well of projects that were ready to go. I agree with Jo on the geographically specific kind of nature of some of the content that's coming through, and I think there's a real place for that when you look at, whether it's Nordic Noir or it's Fargo or Broadchurch. It does seem to be kind of a switch from that kind of gritty urban crime drama where you could be anywhere really, to something that actually has a specific location. And look at the success of Mystery Road and how well that's done over the last couple of seasons as well. I think that's really fantastic, especially for Australia, because a lot of the locations, as we know, are not seen globally yet on the screen, and I think there's a real opportunity there for people. In terms of industry development, we've done a lot of work. Obviously, Screenworks is our biggest partner for industry development in the state. We need another couple of Screenworks across the state, I think, certainly one in Sydney. But we work also with Curious Works and Co-Curious in Western Sydney. We've worked with them recently through an industry development program that saw them bringing writers together every month over a year or maybe longer than that to develop a project which has just finished shooting here out west, which is a feature film that will end up on ABC eventually when it's done a theatrical release, which had 8 new writers and a couple of different directors, including Leah Purcell and Anna Kokinos directing, produced by Sheila Jayadev for Co-Curious, that will come out soon. And that's a really nice example of something that started as a skills development opportunity for new voices and has ended up in a fantastic local feature film that has found a home theatrically and on TV as well. We also work with ICE in Western Sydney. We're working down south with Southeast Arts, and we also work in Broken Hill with practitioners around there. We've done work in Dubbo with Screen Hunter as well. So we try to kind of, develop, support these communities of practice around the state. And to really kind of connect people in so that when there are opportunities for, whether it's anything from a TV commercial to a major blockbuster film, connect those communities to those practitioners so that people get the opportunities that they need.
Yeah, and we've also continued our Screen New South Wales supported programs like the Career Pathway programs as well, which are still putting writers into writers' rooms, even though they're still they're virtual. A lot of
Which
them,
is
even
better.
now, is even virtual, which is
Yeah.
great because they're actually just doing it from home.
Yeah.
And some of them are also, we're seeing people with caring responsibilities in regional Australia who's still able to do that type
Yeah.
of work as well, which is
That's
fantastic.
right. There's been a sort of democratisation
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
ways in regard to giving opportunities to people in regional areas in this period of time, because when nobody can go into a writer's room, it doesn't matter that
Where it is.
the Zoom screen that you happen to be sitting behind is is in Cairns or in Townsville or in Gladstone. You know.
Or in Hollywood, like Vanessa Alexander actually is doing it from Newcastle. Do you know what I mean? It's extraordinary.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we've had colleagues even at work who, one colleague who was stuck in South Africa for 6 months, and so he just worked from there. And again, every morning, you know, sitting on Zoom, and he's sitting in Johannesburg, and he could be down the road. It's been a great kind of access epiphany, really, for the last few months, and hopefully that will continue so that it won't become uncommon to have people joining things virtually, so that there isn't a barrier in terms of access to have to travel to take up these kinds of opportunities.
Yeah. And Jennie, in Northern Territory, Green Territory's also been doing a lot up there.
Yeah, well, we're going to do our first workshop with you, I think.
We are
Something
indeed. We've
there.
got a development lab coming up, which is
Yeah.
part of our Screen Australia enterprise-funded initiative. We're doing similar to the one that we've already done in New South Wales and Queensland as well. So we've got
Yeah.
one coming up that we'll be announcing. Well,
Very
we're
soon.
announcing now, aren't we, really? Oops, exclusive.
Yeah, no, we're really excited about it because we had to find the right project, which is great, and I'm so glad that we have. And working
Yeah.
with Tamarind, which is Daniel McLean and Steve McGregor and Anna Grieve, I think it's going to be so exciting. So I just wanted to mention on this too, I think it's really great when you're in regional to have a look at collaborations, because we collaborate a lot. It's not like you work in complete isolation. I was just making some notes here because I look at some of the things that we've collaborated on. I look at Robbie Hood was Ludo, and obviously since 1788, which is Tanaclin, Maloney and Dillon River. You look at something like Copping It Black, which is a great new series that's coming out for SBS, 4x1 hours, and that's Karma and Bunya. So I think when you're kind of thinking about what to do, you know, even in your own areas, to really have a look at how we can facilitate those discussions as well, because I think that collaboration, you know, we're all Australians and we all bring something to the table. And I think I look at some of the collaborations that we've had in Northern Territory, because sometimes you can be a little isolated up there. I mean, it's a massive place and it's 4 hours. It's funny how it's 4 hours to get everywhere. I mean, it's kind of 4 hours to get to Queensland, 4 hours to New South Wales and 4 hours to Victoria. I don't get it, you know, but anyway. But, you know, it's good to have those collaborations. I think out of that has come some really great work, and hopefully out of the lab, I think that's going to be fantastic as well. Hopefully we'll be doing more with Ken as well. We're really keen to kind of work with Screenworks. We haven't been as focused, I think, on upskilling as perhaps we should have been. I guess that's a really main focus of us now, seeing as we're in that space now, I get for the last couple of years. We've really kind of, as I said, fast-tracked. We've got a lot of production going on locally. And you really realise that you've got massive skills gaps and that we really have to put programs in. I know I've spoken to Kate about this as well. We've all spoken about it. But we really have to put in support for our filmmakers, have a look at some of those skills gaps, I guess in the territory, you know, really in post-production as well. Things like, you know, colour grading, sound, all of that. So we're doing a whole of sector audit to look at what we really need. And, you know, we really want to work with our colleagues too in the other states and territories to look at how we can better collaborate and have a look at their resources and how we can partner with them on that as well. The other thing that I forgot to mention last year that we did, which really held our filmmakers in good stead, we actually did the Generate and Business Enterprise program, which I think maybe Queensland did that as well, I think.
We did, yeah.
Yeah. And those initiatives, even just outside your standard, you know, development where you're developing your scripts and et cetera and your project, those business support programs are really important because we were able to allocate, I think it was $250,000 to Brindle, Tamarind and Global HQ, and they received that each during the pandemic, oddly enough. So it really just, they were able to kind of hunker down and get on with their work, and it really took the pressure off them. And we did Generate Enterprise, which we gave to about 8 practitioners, I think, and that was $80,000 each on that. You know, so out of that came some really great outcomes, and those companies were able to, you know, continue working during a really tough time, I guess, during the pandemic.
No, that felt incredibly important, actually, to put money directly into companies so that they could continue to work and could continue to develop work as well.
Yeah.
And to take away some of that uncertainty, I think given that we have been so lucky in health terms in Australia, the one thing that I will say that this pandemic has brought is an enormous amount of uncertainty. And I think when we looked at what we could do to invest in the growth of the industry, because I think you still have to look at growth even in times of crisis, it was looking at ways in which we could take away some of the uncertainty and take some of the risk on behalf of companies and practitioners that might not necessarily feel able to in those circumstances.
Yeah. And obviously we were just talking about collaboration between the states. Are we going to bust a myth that you're not all in fighting against each other and you're working in silos?
We actually get on, I think, which is really nice.
Because you've done it, you did do a lot during COVID as well, didn't you? Like talking with each other and everything else to try and work collaboratively.
We used to we've always had kind of quarterly meetings with Screen Australia and all the state agencies, but during COVID we've been meeting every 2 weeks. And really kind of it's been about information sharing but also resource sharing. So if one state had developed some resources, that was then shared with everybody else. Everybody's not reinventing the wheel. Developing the COVID safe guidelines was very much a team effort across the industry and across the state agencies as well. So that kind of continues to go on. We've got another meeting this Monday coming actually, which are all by Zoom as well, which again has kind of really helped. And of course all the states sit on the Ausfilm board as well. So we meet with Ausfilm on a really regular basis too. And we also meet with industry bodies, whether it's SPA and that kind of thing too, on a really regular basis. It is very collegiate. We are, of course, healthily competitive when it comes to attracting money and jobs to our states, as you would expect. But it is very much about, we've all got the Australian screen industry at heart, and we certainly, in New South Wales, in terms of bringing in people from overseas, we've done a lot of that kind of quarantining in New South Wales for people moving on. Very happy to kind of help where we can, and where that might not be possible in some other states because of whatever kind of COVID restrictions have been, because it changes so quickly, and certainly has over the last few months. We've all just been trying to support each other through all of this.
And so, Kate, that must be helping from your perspective as well with Ausfilm in terms of making Australia such an attractive proposition. What's the most important thing that's coming out of all of this that's making it?
Well, look, I think that collaborative nature of our industry is what stands us apart as well, and something that's really unique about Ausfilm in that we can bring that umbrella and bring everyone together. So we go out to market. Back in the olden days when we were on the ground in Los Angeles a couple of times a year, we would bring everyone together, and that's not just government, that's our government agencies, but also our businesses which are across the country. And so we have over 50, I think it is now, corporate screen businesses that all work together and work very closely with the agencies. So I think that is definitely seen internationally, particularly, as quite unique, how well we do work together to sell that message of Australia. And absolutely people want, yes, they're collegiate yet slightly competitive as they need to be, but at the end of the day, each state would prefer a production to come to Australia than to go elsewhere, I think I can say on your behalf.
That's right. The biggest challenge is getting them to come to Australia. And once they're here, we can, shake our tail feather a little bit to say, come to us. But we'd much rather they go to New South Wales than they go to South Africa.
Absolutely.
We're sort of all playing for the same team, but as Grainne says, there are times when we are necessarily competitive because we want to do the best that we can for our state and the people who live there. But really, we're kind of all on Team Australia.
Yeah, and I think we're really seeing that as well with the location incentive and how that's working. That is a federal government program, and I know that the government is very keen to see that be spread across the country and for the benefit of the industry widely. And so conversations we're having back to that, crew capacity and training conversation is that although, yes, some productions, the majority of productions to date have been across the East Coast, which is where the major infrastructure is, and the crew base, we're looking at ways how the rest of Australia can still take part in those productions, whether it's training opportunities. If a production is shooting in Victoria, is there an opportunity for training for people from the Northern Rivers or from Tasmania, and to make sure that that opportunity is given more broadly, and in particular into the region. So it doesn't necessarily just need to be the state or the city that's filming in. Yes, the states all have really great training programs for their people, but that doesn't mean that in addition, there can be opportunities for people outside that state, and it's very, it's actually an eligibility requirement to get that funding, that the partners that are coming in make a genuine commitment and a genuine effort to train up and to skill. And that's not to say that the industry that we have isn't some of the best in the world, but it's a really unique and exciting opportunity, I think, right now, just with the level of activity and that consistency, which is what's so important, that we really do have this incredible opportunity to expand our workforce, so to actually grow it. And that's to the benefit of the local productions, but also the international ones that we know want to come in, into future years. So in the past, we've had all these peaks and troughs of production activity, and hopefully now we're in a period of, at least the next few years of consistency, which does enable us all to work together, and it's government and industry working together to see what policies, what programs can we put in place to really to grow that industry. And I think that's an incredibly exciting place to be.
Yeah. I'm going to go now to something a little bit more that I've seen in media articles, I suppose, lately in relation to funding and the support being provided for the international productions that are coming in, and how that might be limiting the amount of funding that's being provided for Australian productions or for development of domestic productions. Is this actually the case, or are you securing extra money to put towards those productions? Does someone want to speak? Because we obviously see a lot of media about, that money should be going to Australian productions or supporting Australian crews or Australian stories. What is it? Is it a myth?
Certainly the way it works in New South Wales is that no local production has missed out because money's gone to an international production. They're separate amounts of money. So when we got a commitment of $175 million over 5 years for our Made in New South Wales fund, which is to attract international production, but is also for local TV drama series and local feature films. And we still have our general kind of core funding, if you like, which is all about local production and industry development and audience development. So there's certainly nobody kind of misses out locally, and if anything, it's given us more money for local production because of the opportunities to reach global audiences through streaming platforms and that kind of thing, and for local features because we want to be able to support them more. It's harder to finance features. It's harder to make them happen because of all the changes that have happened over the last couple of years in terms of, sales agents and upfront sales and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a very different market. But certainly that is a myth that we're cannibalising one for the other. If anything, the local production is our priority and the local sector is our priority. And if it came down to it, it would be about supporting opportunities for local people rather than a big Hollywood studio, to be blunt about it, I guess. But they're very separate pots of money and kept very separately.
And they're kind of interchangeable as well, because if increased international production means more skills opportunities and everything else. So do you want to...
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is you don't get internationals wanting to come here without a strong local sector. So it's in everybody's interest that we support opportunities for the local sector, both for crew but also for stories and above the line as well. Because without that, nobody's really interested, because they would have to bring their heads of the department, they'd have to bring their kind of key crew here. Because it's here, there's so much experience, they don't necessarily need to for most of the projects that there are.
And Jo, in Queensland, there's been a number of internationals, the Julia Roberts and Clooney effect and everything else. What's happening up there in terms of funding and everything?
Well, it's exactly the same position. Not a single dollar is diverted from local content into international content. If anything, the international helps the local rather than being to its detriment. As Grainne said, in terms of skills development and skills development opportunities, but again, that chicken and egg, you can't really have one without the other if you don't have a strong crew base and you don't have really incredibly well respected and well regarded crew, which I think is true of all of Australia, and I certainly know that's true of the Queensland crews, that internationals don't come if you can't offer them great people who they know are going to do a fantastic job. And they love working here and they love working with our crews. But if we didn't invest in local content and if we didn't invest in local production, that wouldn't be the case. And look, it's really, for me, quite a straightforward situation in that we have a production attraction strategy in Queensland, which is funded completely separately to our core funding, which goes into local talent development, development of projects, and local production. And the production attraction strategy does what it says on the tin and operates quite separately. But even in that, there are times when you will see a local producer, a Queensland producer, who's in an international co-production arrangement, and that money, which on the face of it is for international production, will be used to support that producer and that production to make a show which will have inevitably a much higher budget than perhaps they would have been able to make it for if they were doing it simply as an Australian production. So I think that there are lots of advantages that come from our interactions and our business with international studios. And even if there weren't, there would be no dollar detriment anyway.
And I think the other thing is there's a lot of companies that do production services, so that, let's say, Playmaker, due to their relationship with Sony, obviously has brought a number of big budget TV series here, sometimes for other markets. So Chosen, which filmed in Sydney a couple of years ago, was filmed completely in Mandarin for a Chinese market, and that came in through our Made in New South Wales Fund for International, because it was internationally financed and an international project, even though it was being made by a local crew and a local production company, but it was very much on a production services base. So as Jo said, it does actually benefit, benefit local production companies who can go out and get those deals and those projects to bring them here and film them here with local crews.
And you're seeing that through the federal funding as well. And just to your first point, I mean, the location incentive and the location offset is just one mechanism federally that is provided to the industry. Of course, there's the producer offset. There's the money that goes through Screen Australia, the ABC and others. So I think, and perhaps one of the reasons for that myth being out there is, you know, with the way that the location incentive grant works, each time a production is attracted, it's announced, and the money that's actually given as part of that grant is also announced. So you see these big dollar values being put out. But this $400 million that was added to the location incentive last year is over 7 years. So I think it's fair to say that considerably more money goes out federally each year to the Australian sector and the domestic projects as well. It's just that they don't talk about it because the producer offset, like the location offset, is under tax secrecy, but the location incentive isn't. So the numbers are put out there, and I think that just makes people think, wow, what could I do with that money? But I think there is considerable funding going to the domestic side as well. And just to Grainne's point and to what Jo was saying, what's been really interesting in the last 8 months or so with the productions that have been coming in, so I think I mentioned earlier that there were 12 shows that have been secured for Australia, and 8 of those are actually television, which is a different thing, just how that's changed. But many of those have really significant Australian creative involvement, whether it's Australian directors working on some of these episodes. A number of the shows, the ones up in Queensland, are working, NBC working in partnership with Matchbox, and that's a combination of some of those being sort of the production service work, but also others being Matchbox-driven creative projects. That was the same with Clickbait in Melbourne. So you're seeing a lot more interconnectivity, I think, between what was traditionally just coming in under the location offset and now real opportunities for Australian creatives to work alongside, as well as, of course, the really important work for crew and service companies.
And Jennie, up in the Territory, there's been some big funding stuff happening up there with Mavericks and everything, isn't there?
Yeah, we've kind of, I suppose because we're kind of at an earlier stage than the other states. So our focus has really been on the domestic market pretty much. But it's been extraordinary. We're actually putting more money into our local than what we've ever done. So traditionally, I think it used to be about 80,000 into production. I mean, Mavericks is 1.5 million that we've put into that. And it goes to the territory. It's kind of like it still has that frontier kind of spirit. So you never know. I mean, I didn't know that that much was coming in. It was done. So it was great to get and enabled that production to be made, which is fantastic. But it's really good to see that we've got the support of the government and that they will back those stories. And the one thing I also wanted to mention is that it's really important that regional Australia sees themselves on screen. We always see a lot of urban stories, but I think Australia's so different, and in regional areas, it's great to see. I know our all of our kind of towns want to see themselves on screen, which is fantastic. But we're putting in more. Actually, we don't really have a set fund for international productions. The way the government would like to work is on a case-by-case basis, but I don't think we're quite there yet on all of that. But that's something that we're working on. We want to build up our skill base as well. But we've been putting in, I think in Copying It Black, which is announced now, that's 300,000 we put into that. So we're putting considerably more money in than what we've ever done. And I think you have to, because I think, as Grainne was saying, that changing environment, looking at what people are putting in the international market and what the sales agents are securing, it's just changing so much. So I think it's good talking to my colleagues every few weeks, because you find out just exactly what the states and territories do. It's a really, really important body of work, I think, in terms of supporting our filmmakers on the ground and really supporting that development and being that piece of production, because sometimes it's just getting that bit that you need is the hardest. So, and I know in New South Wales you've probably got way more producers than what you're able to kind of fund out there. But you managed to kind of support a whole lot out there, actually, Grainne, which is great. But we're putting in more. So and I'm just waiting to hear what kind of appropriation we get moving forward. So may it continue.
And I think a lot of hard work goes.
Yes, exactly. A
lot of hard work goes into all of that, securing additional finance on each of your behalfs, and we thank you all really, because I know from our conversations with you all that is such a tough gig to do.
The one thing I wanted to say too about the international productions is that it gives us profile. And when we compete with, for example, we would be competing with agriculture, minerals, tourism, all of those really, and they're big ticket items. So I don't think you can underestimate just the profile that also those international productions, all of a sudden, you're getting all the publicity. It actually really helps us, I think, even from the domestic side.
I think Jennie's totally right about that. Certainly I can see in Queensland that the political will and the investment that has followed that will has been driven in a lot of ways by the profile of the international production, because it's always bigger dollars, bigger stars, so more column inches.
Yep.
But it does actually start to have a knock-on effect, and I think in terms of regional development, we're looking now at putting a studio into Cairns. I don't think that conversation would have been happening, certainly not with any seriousness, if we hadn't got a situation in which the government could see significant returns on its investments into films and television, a lot of which have been driven by the big name projects and the international.
I think it's that, but I think it's also the because we're having the same kind of situation in New South Wales. But I think it's also the rate at which the sector has bounced back post-COVID has been really noticed, and as kind of all governments will be focused on economic recovery and jobs. The screen sector is one that once something is obviously greenlit, it starts employing straight away and it starts spending straight away. Unlike, if you're building a factory or something like that, it will take probably a couple of years, and then there's a bit of skilling up and, all the rest of it. Things take a lot longer. In the screen industry, it's almost immediate. Certainly we did some kind of looking at figures at the end of last year, and in the 6 months previously, projects that we'd supported, about 10,000 people were working, and there were about 25 projects that were happening kind of September, October time, which when you kind of think 6 months previously, people had down tools because of the anxiety around COVID and that things couldn't happen. We have come back out of it so very quickly, and I certainly see a very strong trajectory going forward in terms of kind of what's on our production slate over the next year or so. That's certainly something that's been looked at by governments as screen being a real contributor to this post-COVID economic recovery. I'm not sure that would have been maybe looked at quite so seriously, like Joe said, a couple of years ago, but certainly it is now, I think, right across the country.
Yeah. And I think there's also, we'd be remiss, and you mentioned it before, Joe, about the studio in Cairns, to not talk about sound stages and infrastructure. And obviously there's actually a lot happening in regional Australia in that regard as well. And so, Kate, let's talk globally for a second about infrastructure and sound stages. The need for film studio space. Can you tell us about what we're seeing in terms of the global demand for soundstage and how that's kind of flowing into Australia and into regional Australia?
Yeah, look, I think the global demand and the global shortage has been for infrastructure has been around for a couple of years now. So we know if you see what's happening in territories, the amount of investments that's going into places like the UK, that you cannot get a soundstage in the UK, parts of the North America, the US itself, and Canada. Like, it's just impossible to get stages. So there's new investments coming up daily. You read them weekly in the trades, and I think that's been very much noted in Australia now, with the amount of activity that's going on, just how hard it is to get access to purpose-built stages. And what's been really incredible to watch is just how creative and innovative this industry is, and it hasn't actually stopped us getting any productions to date. They really are finding unique facilities to go in. COVID, particularly with convention centres because they've shut down in terms of events, we've had productions in both Queensland and New South Wales and Victoria actually go into convention centres. That's not sustainable. We'll get events back up and running, sometime this year, you'd think. Now, exactly. We're back in person. Companies are looking at different options at the moment, but there is a real opportunity in Australia right now for investment into infrastructure, and again, that's an exciting thing, and that's great to talk about that from the political perspective, because one of the arguments is if you put competitive incentives in place and you get the productions happening, you bring in that spend, you get people to work, you'll also get increased investment, whether it's private and maybe private in partnership with states, depending on what's happening around the country. But there's definitely opportunities, and there's definitely people we all know of looking at what they can do. There's been a number of government announcements recently. We've seen the commitment to the studio facility in Fremantle in Perth, which will really hopefully put them on the map and enable them to tap into some of the international productions. We've got the large soundstage coming up in Victoria. That should be online by the end of this year. Queensland's government's made recent announcements, and there's a lot of people looking in New South Wales for what that can happen. So I think everyone will agree that there's a shortage. Even what they can do in other facilities, there's a real opportunity, and again, that's exciting.
Yeah, and it's not that it's just happened because of COVID or because there's increased production here at the moment. It's been going on for years.
There's just so much content being made globally these days. And that's, of course, we all know what the SVODs have done and the increase in production, but it's just ridiculous. It's huge how much is being made, and COVID just sort of put a pause on it, but it hasn't actually stopped the amount of content. It's probably, there'll need to be a catch-up period as well now. So there's just huge demand.
Grainne, do you want to talk about New South Wales in terms of infrastructure?
I can't talk about any of the projects that I know are happening because they're not mine to announce. But there are things that are happening, and there will be announcements, I think, coming soon over the next couple of months. Certainly, is there studio space is probably the second question we get asked when it's, is there money, or, is this something that would work here? The second one is there stage space? And obviously in New South Wales, Fox Studios is busy with Thor and Marvel, certainly for this year. but we have got things that are either location-based or, George Miller has been shooting 3,000 Years of Longing, a new feature with Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton, in an old Pfizer factory in Western Sydney, where they've had, 3 different kind of buildings that they've built their sets in, and that's worked really well for them, using the old ABC studios at Gore Hill. As Kate said, been using the convention centre for a bunch of things. And we've been using the showgrounds. So, Fox Studios used to be the showgrounds, and now the showgrounds out at Olympic Park are also being used as a studio space for a number of different productions, which is fantastic. However, custom-built sound stages are really important, and we do need them. Obviously, up here, you've got Byron Studios, which has got a temporary facility out at Alstonville, which is booked, which is fantastic for here. And I know they've got plans for a more permanent facility in Ballina. And there are other regional locations that are looking at things that are privately funded. We are also talking to government about how government might invest in and develop a project, probably closer to Sydney, to take advantage of kind of all the work that's here, but also the work projected. I mean, as Kate said, you look at the UK, as soon as something gets built, it gets bought out for the next 10 years by one of the global people like, Netflix or even Star Wars, has got studio space booked for the next 5 or 10 years. So it is something that is required globally, and in this case, it is if you build it, they will come kind of thing, because they are at such a premium at the moment.
Yeah, there is a need. And obviously, Jo, up in far north Queensland, you mentioned the Cairns one before, but do you want to talk about the infrastructure in Queensland and how even with the Cairns, because that's been on the table for a while now, hasn't it?
It has, but it is finally happening. And the government committed as an election pledge, both for were they elected, which they were. Both for a Cairns studio and also a production facility on the Gold Coast. And that would be in addition to the Screen Queensland studios in Brisbane, which are not purpose-built. They were a refurb of some warehouses. That sits in addition to Pinnacle Studios on the Gold Coast and also Village Roadshow Studios. Even then, people have been using convention centres and warehouses and kind of just finding anywhere that can double for a studio because we have been so busy. But as Grainne says, it's, question 2.
And Jennie, any studios planned for Darwin or Alice Springs?
God, I feel like I have to get in there. Soon it'll be the only place without a studio. Look, we have looked at that, but I think really, and we've got more, I think, of what Jo was sort of saying, where you repurpose a building where you can refurbish and redo it. And we have got some sites that we were looking at that have been used previously for things like Australia with Baz Luhrmann. But I think really it'd be a different proposition, I think, to everyone else. And I think it would have to work for the local sector as well, in particular. So we kind of we do need one there, not on such a bigger scale, because I think even for the local sector, as we're growing there, they would certainly use it. And I think as we were talking, we're looking towards the Asia market in particular for us, because our proximity, again, oddly enough, it's 4 hours away, Singapore, so another 4-hour trip. But we see that as kind of something where we can have better collaboration just because of where we're placed. So I think that might be something, we are looking at it, but I think not in the same way, I think, as the other states.
Although I should stress that the Cairns studio is very likely to be driven by local production.
Yeah.
It's very likely to have an educational partnership that sits inside of it so that it can be used in a multi-purpose way.
Yeah. We did talk about that. So we talked about working with you when I was talking to Carly.
Yeah,
today.
so I do think that there are some, I do think that there are ways that you can make sense of these things, not just looking at them as a production facility that's going to be full of Hollywood studio material.
And certainly the ones that have been kind of talked about and planned for New South Wales, again, all of that kind of thing. absolutely looking at training facilities, absolutely looking at equipment and gear, and post-production facilities and kind of everything along the way. And also looking to the future about virtual production and volume capture spaces as well, so that they can work for that area. But also looking at the local sector, so whether it's a big shiny floor show, or it's a game show, or it's a small TV drama series, or it's the next Marvel or whatever it might be, a facility that would work kind of across all of those areas as well.
Excellent.
And I do think just on that, anyone looking at the new infrastructure opportunities does need to look at it at the same time as looking at workforce capabilities, because there's no point Australia in another year having a whole 3 more facilities if we haven't actually got a strategy to build the workforce, because you need the people to actually work on these productions.
Totally right.
Yeah. And I think that's why we end up working with Screen Queensland, Screen New South Wales and Screen Territory, is to kind of, as Screenworks, to help do that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's head into some Q&A and there's quite a number here, so let's move through it, which is good. So, do any of the funding bodies require their funded regional productions to select a quota of production attachments from the geographical region itself? And if not, why?
Where we have things that are shooting in the region, we don't have it as a demand, but it's a very strong, encouraged thing to do. So let's say if there's a big TV drama series shooting up here, we would want those attachments to come from here. All of our attachments, we want them to come from or our priority, what we call our priority areas, so people who are underrepresented in the screen industry, certainly through our program. So that's whether it's people from Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander backgrounds, people with a disability, people from culturally diverse backgrounds, people from regional areas, people from Western Sydney. They're the kind of the 5 areas that we kind of have a priority for. So certainly something that's shooting regional, we would expect that they have regional attachments. We also get sign-off on those attachments. We also have a register of attachments. So if you're watching this and you're not on our attachment register and you're in regional Australia, get yourself on our attachment register. You can do that through the website, so that we can suggest people's names to productions when they come to us. Anyone else want to
We're
speak
very
to that?
similar, with the exception that we don't have a special requirement for people from Western Sydney.
And there's also a follow-up on that, and it's probably more of a statement, wonderful about attachments on regional productions, but possibly we can get in early on projects. Is it possible to get in early on projects and have writer attachments in rooms for projects that are taking place in each of those regions as well? I think there's some things that we're already doing with Inside the Writers' Room, with New South Wales in particular, but maybe is there anything else that...
Well, when things come into us for development, we certainly look at who they've got in the writer's room. We will often suggest that where things are sole writer, that their writer's room is expanded, and especially if it's a regionally based story, we would want to have regionally based writers involved in those. So that's certainly something we'd have. But again, if you're kind of at an emerging level and looking for attachments and that's a specific thing, let us know so that we can make sure that we know about you and can suggest people.
Yeah, exactly the same. I feel like the biggest thing is you're never going to offer an attachment to somebody that you don't know, because you can't. And I feel like if people can come and let us know that they're interested in particular opportunities, and if writers are looking for opportunities in particular to be inside of a writer's room, let us know. I mean, we have a formal process that you can go through and an EOI that you can put in. But equally, you can just pick up the phone or send an email and speak to someone in the team about that and explore a little bit about what you want to do. And it's much easier to help place people, actually, particularly if they're writers and they're looking for room opportunities, if you've got a sense of what drives them creatively. So those conversations are really important. And I think for people who are living in regional areas, no different, although I appreciate that there's a sort of additional level of difficulty associated with it. But again, Zoom, telephones, and also we're we're getting up to and out to the Queensland regions as much as possible to try and meet people informally and just have a cup of coffee and just chat about those things, so we can get more of those people into those opportunities. But like Grainne, we do look at our development slate and look at where the opportunities might be coming from. Often with the bigger projects, by the time we get involved in them, they're already developed and it's too late to put somebody in a room, but sometimes not. And so we have been able to place people in some really great writers' rooms, on some really high-profile productions, just simply through a fluke of timing. But if we're obviously going to go out to those people with those opportunities who've put their hand up and said, I'm interested. So I do encourage everybody to just get in touch. And if you're in Queensland and want to be a part of writers' rooms in particular, to let us know.
Great. A couple of questions in here about short film initiatives and funding. Are any of the state agencies considering short form funding? They're often a great stepping stone for emerging practitioners, especially in regional Australia. And also, and one here is also just mentioning the sound of production funding rounds outside of their specific initiatives that are for short film. Is there any short film initiatives around at the moment?
Yeah.
Oh, you've done them. Yeah, we've done them. You go first.
Okay. We have consistently funded short films, though always as part of an initiative rather than as part of our core production funding. It hasn't seemed to make sense to us to fund short form out of our core production funding, which is, as you can imagine, incredibly competitive and has a lot of demand on it. But I do completely believe in the power of the short film or a short form proof of concept or something like that, a web series which is short form, to demonstrate the vision and the voice and the talent of creatives and crew. And I think it's really, really important to continue to do that. We do something in that space every year. This year we have the Ride short film anthology, which is going to be 6 short films, which we're making in a sort of ridiculous time frame. Good luck to everybody involved. To screen at the Brisbane International Film Festival later this year as part of an anthology, and the Ride program is aimed at people from underrepresented backgrounds so that we can encourage greater diversity and opportunity for people who are from those backgrounds in the screen sector. So that's just one example, but we have done proof of concept, which is same but slightly different, and that had more of a web focus, and other short form programs, some of them genre specific, some of them not. But we do feel like it's a really important thing to do. Also, the low budget feature film as a subsidised way of breaking new talent and allowing people to demonstrate that they can handle long form. That's something that we're very much committed to.
And the one I wanted to mention too is similar to you, I think, going into the film festival. So we're doing the same thing, Joe. But we run Spark short films, and we've actually put increasingly more money into these short films over the last couple of years. This year we did something different. We got the ABC on board, and we actually put a kind of just a little theme going through it called Intergenerational Stories, so very much focused on documentary. And basically there were 5 projects selected which we will screen at Darwin International Film Festival. But the beauty of that program is that the films selected, the filmmakers got to work with the ABC commissioners, so they were each allocated with a commissioner, which was really helpful. So they were able to work with that commissioner as they developed and went through the production process. And obviously, subject to the films being great, which I'm sure they all will be, they'll be filmed during Old People's Home for 4-year-olds during the next series. So it's actually really helpful for us that we're able to kind of give our short filmmakers a credit on the ABC, really important. And the other proviso that we had in there was that because of COVID, we really wanted to support our musicians in the territory, because obviously they couldn't perform and all the rest of it. So we made sure that a minimum of $5,000 was to go into musicians or musicians or composers. That go into those short films. So, hopefully they'll all come out. We had 3 applications and 3 successful applications from the Indigenous filmmakers as well. So, out of the 5, which is really fantastic as well. Fantastic. So, yeah, we'll see what they're like. But it's really good to do those, and I think it's great for people to really experiment on those short films and really cut their teeth on short films. So it's a good way for us to kind of really identify, other filmmakers coming through and writers and everything. So it's great.
Like Joe, we don't generally have short form funding available through our normal production and development rounds, but we do have initiatives. So we've usually done the Emerging Filmmakers Fund, which funds 3 short films at $30,000 each, plus we put an EP onto it as well. And we've been running for the last 4 years our Screenability Filmmakers Fund, which is for teams that have at least one member living with a disability, and those films premiere at the Sydney Film Festival every year. We are doing a partnership with, I think, all the state agencies and SBS this year. That hasn't been announced yet, but that will be a kind of in the factual space. But we do online and web series as part of our normal production funding rounds. So we've, again, like Joe, we've kind of find that it is a great way of proof of concept, or also just to have a standalone little series. So one that worked really well recently is Ding Dong, I'm Gay. They'd done a pilot which had got, I think, up to something like 2 million views, came in then for a whole first series. And the last time I looked, it's had about 5 million people have viewed that so far, which is fantastic. And we've done a number of those, but they just come in through our normal production funding rounds.
Yeah, and also Screenworks does do some short film programs as well, including our Fearless films, and we've got a couple of other programs. Question for you now, Kate Marks, about the international profile and perceptions of Australian regional stories and content. What is that international profile and perceptions in terms, I suppose, of audience and industry?
In terms of Australian stories or the international stories?
Yeah, Australian regional stories.
Look, I think Penny said it in the previous session, just that there is such a a huge spotlight on Australia at the moment, and it's a real opportunity to capitalise on that. And I think you see it in the projects that are working with Australian creatives that are wanting to tap into that. It's not just the crew; it's working with Australian writers and so forth. And then you're seeing that through programs like Australians in Film as well, with just the connectivity that they can provide for Australian content creators. So I think there is a huge demand at the moment, and I think people should be really trying to work out how to capitalise on that. There's, we're talking about the demand in content, and Penny was saying again how all the, the SVODs are now looking at having people on the ground. I think just in terms of how much smaller the world's got in terms of the content we're looking at, there is a huge opportunity now for us to get our stories out globally.
Another question here from Jess Cooper-Wheatley, who's an emerging practitioner in our region. What do you want to see, for the funding bodies, in applications for development funding from emerging screenwriters or producers? Is there anything that they can do to stand out?
Yes, there is. So we did a webinar on this, which is about how do you write a compelling development application. So if you go to the Screen New South Wales website, have a look at the Screen Connects webinars. They're all free to view. Have a look at that. And we had our head of investment, and we had Mike Jones and Andrea Ulbrich talking about what it takes to make a compelling development application. Everything you need to know is kind of in there. And I suspect it would answer a lot of the questions for other state agencies as well, because we're all looking for the same things. We're looking for people who can be clear about their idea, be very clear about why it needs to be written and why they're the person to tell it, and who the creative team is around them, and look at budgets and deliverables and all of that kind of thing as well. But everybody's looking for a spark, something that is new and original, that you've talked to the sector, to the marketplace, that you know where you might see it being placed, whether that's on TV or feature or whatever it might be.
I don't have much to add to that. we've got our own little webinar, but we can watch both.
There is no competition.
But seriously, it's true. You're looking for something that's distinct. You're looking for something that feels like it's authentic to the people who are telling you. You're looking for something that has to be told now. You're looking for something that knows where it's going to end up in terms of where it's going to be viewed and where its audience is going to be found. And I think that, if you can really shape those things, you can really stand out.
We do still get applications where, and have conversations with people who say, well, I don't watch TV, but I think the ABC would like it. And really, when it is so competitive at the moment, that's not good enough. If you think it should be on ABC, what day, what time, and why? And who is the ABC audience that you're trying to tap into? And that's just an example, but we seriously have conversations like that every week, where and people still think that they should get public money to make something that they don't know don't know where the audience might be for it.
I think that's really that is, I wouldn't say common, but it does happen more often than it should. And I think in some ways it's really about that sense of, for me, I always say that I want somebody I want the creative to understand and be able to articulate things so that they can make what's meaningful to them meaningful to an audience. And if you can only articulate it in terms of why it's meaningful to you, that's incredibly problematic, whether it's a lack of understanding of the market or a lack of understanding of where it sits or why it's important. It's just, have the audience in mind. It's a communication.
Yep. I'm just conscious of time, but a number of the remaining questions are on topics that we're going to be covering in other sessions, things like regulatory changes and, different skills that are happening in regional Australia. But I think I'd like to give each of you a chance to wrap up and maybe end on a positive note, or may end up being a negative note. The future of the industry in regional Australia, what are you all seeing in your crystal balls, and where, what are you most excited about for regional Australia?
I can start. I'm just excited about the level of activity that is happening now, but is we're seeing down the future, and that's for all parts of Australia. Really happy and excited to see opportunities for, particularly from the international productions, but whether getting out of the major cities on the east coast, there's still a lot coming your way. It's okay, but looking further west as well, and just being able to tackle some of those issues that we've been facing for a long time, particularly around capacity. So I'm really excited about what we can tackle with a consistent pipeline of productions, both domestic and international.
Great. Regional New South Wales?
Regional New South Wales. I don't think location should be an issue. People in Sydney are not all going out for drinks on a Friday night together to talk about the industry and how they might pitch their next project. There's a lot of people from cities, as you would know, moving to regional areas because they can still carry on their city job from a regional area. There's been seamless transitions for some parts of the sector, like animation, like some post-production, that have kind of moved into more remote working facilities. And certainly some of the broadcasters are looking at how they might kind of move out of the city. So I think there's a much more widespread acceptance that the workforce in this sector is very dispersed and that good stories can come from anywhere. And that's kind of what it comes down to, really, is that kind of where does the good story come from? I think Zoom has been fantastic and awful at the same time, in the sense that, this is how we all kind of work now, but this is how we all work now. And it's much easier to have a conversation with somebody who's in LA or in London or in Melbourne through that medium, rather than feeling that you have to travel or that you're disadvantaged by not being physically there in the room. When we can all travel again, of course, that is a really important way to make relationships, but in the meantime, this is a really good way to get kind of yourself in front of people. But it does come down to the uniqueness of stories and being able to tell those in a compelling way. And I think there is no geographic boundary to that.
Okay.
I believe that there is no reason to think that the interest in making productions in regional areas will move away. I think that regional Australia has more than proven its capability. I think that as long as people are interested in making projects in regional Australia, then we can work to develop the crew base and work to develop skills so that we can continue to meet that demand. But the biggest thing for me is really none of that. It's really that I think the reason that I came into this industry is because I'm excited about stories and because I want to be entertained and fascinated and shocked and surprised and horrified by the things that come out of people's brains. That they can then work with other people to put on screens. And I just feel like there's such interesting, distinct, unique voices and points of view that exist in regional Australia that we would be very, very foolish to close our ears and eyes to them, and I don't think that we will.
And Jennie?
Well, we're totally regional, so
Yep.
I don't have a real kind of, metropolitan area. But look, I'm just excited at where our filmmakers are going, and I've got to speak, I suppose, purely Territorian, but just the scope of stories, the talent that's coming out, the diversity of stories. Story is it, and I agree with Jo on that, because at the end of the day, it's a shitty story, it's going to make a shitty project, So if they're really great stories, and it is that amazing thing where you do have those moments where you're looking at what's coming out of our filmmakers and you're wondering where they're coming from. But it's really exciting. I think the last few years we've just seen just amazing growth in the Territory. The talent coming out of there, the new talent that we have access to now that have just coming out because we've stimulated the market's incredible. And it's just the diversity of genre. Traditionally, the Territory had really been maybe documentary and features every so often, and features are really hard to make, but we did get the odd good one from Warwick Thornton, so we're very fortunate. But I think they're really broadening their scope on that now, and we've got much more. You've got children's, you've got great series, you've got mini-series, you've got more collaborations than what we've ever had with other filmmakers from Victoria, from Queensland, from New South Wales. So I think, and it's great for our filmmakers not having to travel, I've got to say. Most of them would love to stay there and work with their families. Not everyone wants to be scattered across Australia. And I think now we've got, more opportunity than ever for our filmmakers to stay, on country in the Northern Territory and really come up with some great ideas and great projects. And I know we've got a great pipeline coming through. I just hope we have enough money to fund them all.
Excellent. And I suppose, just to wrap up, I mentioned earlier that article that kind of mentioned that the Australian industry was hitting a golden age. Maybe it's regional Australia that's actually hitting a golden age in film and TV right now, because it is home to a lot of production and we're seeing a lot of growth in that area, in particular in each of our states that we're talking here. So maybe we should be talking about the golden age of regional Australia.
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
And on that note, I'm going to leave it on a positive. Please join me in thanking all of our guest speakers here today: Kate Marks, Grainne Brunston, Jo Dillon, and also Jennie Hughes.